Margaret Thompson was not a woman who craved attention. At 72 years old, she had lived a simple and quiet life filled with small joys, gardening, baking pies for her grandchildren, and reading novels by the fireplace on chilly evenings. She wasn't rich or famous, but she didn't need to be. Her greatest pride was her son, Thomas, whom she had raised alone after his father passed away when he was just 5 years old. Despite their struggles, Margaret always made sure Thomas knew he was loved. Now retired and living modestly, she spent most of her days looking forward to visits from her family. On this particular morning, Margaret woke up early, excited about her upcoming trip. She hadn't seen her grandchildren in months, and they were eagerly waiting for her at their home 3 states away. With her suitcase packed neatly and her favorite book tucked under her arm, she headed to the airport. It was a short drive, and as she parked her car in the lot, she felt a familiar flutter of anticipation. Flying wasn't something she did often, but today it promised adventure, a chance to reunite with the people she loved most. When Margaret arrived at the check-in counter, everything seemed normal. She handed over her ticket and identification, expecting no issues. After all, she had booked her flight weeks ago, ensuring she got a first-class seat so she could travel comfortably. But as the agent scanned her ticket, a frown creased her face. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson," the young woman said apologetically, "but there seems to be a problem with your reservation." Margaret blinked in confusion. "A problem? What kind of problem?" The agent hesitated, glancing nervously at her computer screen before replying, "It appears your first-class booking has been canceled. We can only offer you an economy seat for this flight." For a moment, Margaret was speechless. She had saved carefully for this trip, choosing first class specifically because she wanted to avoid the cramped conditions of coach seating. "But I paid for first class," she stammered. "How could this happen?" "I understand how frustrating this must be," the agent replied, though her tone lacked genuine empathy. "Unfortunately, these things do occur sometimes. If you'd like, we can try to resolve it later, but for now, you'll have to take the economy seat if you want to board the flight." Margaret's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She glanced around, noticing other passengers watching curiously as the situation unfolded. Some looked sympathetic, while others appeared indifferent. Still, she didn't want to make a scene. Taking a deep breath, she nodded reluctantly. "Fine," she muttered. "I'll take the economy seat." As she made her way through security and toward the gate, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling of being treated unfairly. She had worked hard, her entire life, sacrificing countless luxuries to provide for her son, and now here she was, being brushed aside like an inconvenience. The injustice gnawed at her, though she tried to push the thought aside. Perhaps once she boarded the plane, she could focus on the excitement of seeing her grandchildren again. Boarding began shortly after, and Margaret shuffled onto the aircraft with the rest of the passengers. As she walked down the narrow aisle, she couldn't help but glance enviously at the spacious first-class section. There, passengers lounged in wide, plush seats, sipping glasses of champagne and chatting animatedly. One man even stretched out, his legs casually, oblivious to the discomfort of those squeezed into economy behind him. Margaret found her assigned seat near the back of the plane. It was cramped, with barely enough room to stretch her legs. The passenger beside her, a burly man engrossed in a video game on his phone, barely acknowledged her presence. Sighing heavily, she settled in, trying to ignore the growing sense of resentment bubbling inside her. As the plane taxied down the runway and lifted off into the sky, Margaret gazed out the window. Clouds drifted past like cotton candy, and the world below shrank into miniature landscapes. Normally, she would have found the view breathtaking, but today, her thoughts kept returning to the indignity of the situation. Why had her first-class seat been taken away? Who had decided that someone else deserved it more than her? Her musings were interrupted when a conversation between 2 passengers in front of her caught her ear. One of them, a well-dressed woman, with designer sunglasses perched atop her head, was boasting loudly about how she had managed to snag a last-minute upgrade to first class. "Oh, it cost me a fortune," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "But trust me, it's worth every penny. Those seats are divine." Margaret clenched her fists tightly in her lap. She had never considered herself a jealous person, but hearing such casual entitlement made her blood boil. These people had no idea what it meant to work for what they had to scrape together pennies just to put food on the table. They took their privileges for granted, while someone like her, a hard-working, decent human being, was forced to endure discomfort simply because the system failed her. Determined to distract herself, Margaret pulled out her book and tried to immerse herself in its pages. But the words blurred together, unable to hold her attention. Instead, memories flooded back. Memories of late nights spent sewing uniforms for Thomas, of skipping meals so he could eat, of cheering him on at school, events despite her exhaustion. All those sacrifices had led to this moment, where she sat squeezed into a tiny seat, overlooked and undervalued. Little did Margaret, or anyone else on that plane, realize that her connection to the airline ran far deeper than anyone could have imagined. Unbeknownst to her, the events of this day would set off a chain reaction that would change not only her life, but also the lives of countless others. For now, however, she remained unaware of the secret looming just beyond the horizon, hidden beneath layers of corporate bureaucracy and familial devotion. As the flight continued, Margaret closed her eyes, letting the hum of the engines lull her into a restless sleep. Somewhere in the recesses of her mind, she dreamed of justice, a world where kindness triumphed over greed, where effort was rewarded, and where people like her weren't forgotten. Little did she know, her dream was closer to reality than she ever could have imagined. The flight had been uneventful for the first hour, with Margaret dozing off intermittently as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet. But just as she began to drift into a deeper sleep, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, startling her awake. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in a calm but firm tone, "we are experiencing some unforeseen circumstances that require us to make an unscheduled landing. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts until further notice." A ripple of unease spread through the cabin. Passengers exchanged worried glances and whispers erupted as everyone tried to piece together what was happening. Was there engine trouble, bad weather, or something worse? Margaret gripped the armrests tightly, her heart racing. She wasn't particularly fond of flying under normal circumstances, and this unexpected announcement only heightened her anxiety. But as the minutes ticked by, something about the situation struck her as odd. The crew seemed unusually composed, almost too calm for an emergency. There were no frantic movements, no visible signs of panic. Even the pilot's voice had lacked urgency, sounding more rehearsed than spontaneous. Margaret frowned, her instincts telling her that something wasn't quite right. Unable to shake the feeling, she decided to seek answers. Leaning forward, she tapped lightly on the shoulder of the flight attendant standing nearby. When the young woman turned around, Margaret forced a polite smile. "Excuse me," she said softly, "but could you tell me what's going on? Is everything okay?" The flight attendant hesitated, glancing briefly toward the cockpit before meeting Margaret's gaze. For a split second, it looked like she might refuse to answer, but then she leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "To be honest, Mrs. Thompson," she murmured, "there's someone important waiting for us on the ground." Margaret blinked in confusion. "Someone important? What do you mean?" Before the attendant could elaborate, another crew member called her away, leaving Margaret with more questions than answers. Who could possibly warrant such secrecy? And why would they single out this particular flight? Her mind raced with possibilities, ranging from government officials to celebrities, but none of them seemed plausible enough to justify diverting an entire aircraft. As the plane descended, Margaret peered out the window, trying to catch a glimpse of their destination. They weren't heading toward a major airport. Instead, the runway below belonged to a small private airstrip surrounded by open fields. It was clear that whatever, or whoever was waiting for them was keeping a low profile. When the plane finally touched down, the engines roared as the brakes brought it to a stop. Moments later, the doors swung open, and a group of sharply dressed individuals stepped aboard. Their polished appearances stood in stark contrast to the casual attire of the regular passengers. Each carried themselves with an air of authority, their eyes scanning the cabin methodically. Margaret watched silently as they moved down the aisle, their focus unwavering. Then, to her astonishment, one of them stopped directly in front of her. Row. A tall man with salt and pepper hair and a warm smile extended his hand. "Mrs. Thompson," he asked gently, "may I have a word with you?" Her stomach churned with nervousness. How did these strangers know her name? And why were they singling her out? Swallowing hard, she nodded and followed him off the plane. As she stepped onto the tarmac, the cool breeze brushed against her face, offering a brief moment of clarity amidst the chaos. The man introduced himself as Richard, the CEO of Global Wings Airlines, the very airline she had been traveling with. His demeanor was friendly yet professional, and he wasted no time getting to the point. "Mrs. Thompson," he began, "I apologize for the inconvenience caused during your journey. However, we've been expecting you." Margaret stared at him, utterly baffled. "Expecting me? Why? What's going on here?" Richard hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, he said, "It's about your son, Thomas." At the mention of her son's name, Margaret's pulse quickened. "Thomas? What does my son have to do with any of this?" Richard smiled reassuringly. "Perhaps it's best if I explain everything once we reach our headquarters. Rest assured, Mrs. Thompson, nothing bad has happened. In fact, quite the opposite." Despite her confusion, Margaret agreed to accompany him. A luxurious black car awaited them on the tarmac, its sleek design gleaming under the afternoon sun. As they settled into the plush leather seats, Richard launched into an explanation that left Margaret reeling. He revealed that Thomas, her beloved son whom she had raised alone, was not just a successful businessman. He was the founder and majority shareholder of Global Wings Airlines. Over the past 2 decades, he had quietly built the company from the ground up, transforming it into one of the largest and most respected airlines in the world. Yet, despite his immense success, he had chosen to keep this information from her, fearing that the pressures of wealth and fame might disrupt the peaceful life she cherished. Margaret listened intently, her emotions swirling between pride and disbelief. All those years of working double shifts, attending every parent-teacher meeting, and scrimping to provide for her family had paid off in ways she never imagined. Thomas had achieved greatness, not through luck or privilege, but through sheer determination and hard work. Richard went on to explain that recent events involving mishandling of customer complaints, including Margaret's seating issue, had prompted Thomas to take immediate action. He had personally intervened, ordering the diversion of her flight so that he could address the matter himself. "Your son cares deeply about his customers," Richard said earnestly, "and he especially cares about you. That's why he asked me to bring you here, to ensure that you understand how much you mean to him." Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes as she absorbed the magnitude of what Richard was saying. She had always known Thomas was special, but this revelation surpassed anything she could have dreamed of. Still, beneath the surface, a part of her wondered how this newfound knowledge would change her life, and whether she was ready for it. By the time they arrived at the corporate headquarters, Margaret's head was spinning with thoughts. The building itself was a marvel of modern architecture, its glass walls reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. Inside, employees bustled about, their faces lighting up with recognition as Richard escorted her through the lobby. Whispers followed in their wake, and Margaret couldn't help but feel like a celebrity stepping onto a red carpet. Yet, for all the attention she received, her focus remained fixed on one thing: seeing her son. As they approached a set of double doors marked Executive Suite, Richard paused and turned to her. "Are you ready, Mrs. Thompson?" he asked gently. Margaret took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever came next. "Yes," she replied firmly. "Let's go." With that, the doors swung open, revealing a spacious office bathed in soft light. And there, standing near the window with his back turned, was Thomas. Dressed in a tailored suit, he looked every bit the powerful executive Richard had described. But to Margaret, he was still her little boy, The same boy who used to chase butterflies in the backyard and climb onto her lap for bedtime stories. As if sensing her presence, Thomas turned around. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then, breaking into a wide grin, he crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into a tight embrace. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry about what happened on the flight. I promise it won't happen again." Margaret hugged him fiercely, tears streaming down her cheeks. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to fully grasp the enormity of her son's achievements and the depth of his love for her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together, just as they always had. The embrace between Margaret and Thomas lasted longer than either of them expected. For a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. The bustling office, the curious stares of employees, even the lingering questions about how they had ended up in this situation, all of it dissolved into the warmth of their reunion. Margaret clung to her son, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions: pride, disbelief, and an unshakable sense of love that had carried her through decades of sacrifice. When they finally pulled apart, Thomas guided his mother to a plush leather sofa in the corner of his office. He sat beside her, holding her hand as if afraid she might disappear. "Mom," he began softly, "I owe you an explanation." Margaret nodded, wiping away tears with the back of her free hand. "Start from the beginning," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. "How did all of this happen, and why didn't you tell me sooner?" Thomas sighed deeply, leaning back against the cushions. His expression was a blend of guilt and determination, as though he had rehearsed this conversation countless times, but still wasn't sure where to begin. "It's not that I wanted to keep secrets from you," he admitted. I didn't want anything to change. You've always been so content with your life, your garden, your books, your visits. With the grandkids, I didn't want to burden you with something that might feel overwhelming." Margaret raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "Overwhelming? How could knowing my own son is one of the most successful people in the world be overwhelming?" Thomas chuckled nervously. "Let me explain." He took a deep breath before launching into the story of how Global Wings Airlines came to be. It all started 20 years ago, shortly after he graduated from college. Armed with a degree in business and a head full of dreams, Thomas landed a job at a small regional airline. At first, it was just another stepping stone, a way to pay the bills while he figured out what he truly wanted to do with his life. But as he worked his way up the ranks, he realized there was potential for something greater. The aviation industry was ripe for innovation, and Thomas saw an opportunity to make travel more accessible, affordable, and enjoyable for everyone, not just the wealthy elite. With grit and determination, he saved every penny he earned, eventually scraping together enough capital to launch his own charter service. It was a modest operation at first, catering to corporate clients who needed private flights. But word spread quickly about his commitment to customer satisfaction, and soon, bigger opportunities began knocking. Within a decade, Thomas had expanded his business into a full-fledged commercial airline, complete with state-of-the-art planes, cutting-edge technology, and a team of dedicated professionals. Throughout it all, he kept his roots firmly planted in the values his mother had instilled in him: hard work, humility, and kindness. Every decision he made, from hiring policies to passenger amenities, was guided by these principles. And yet, despite his meteoric rise, he chose to keep his success under wraps, fearing that revealing his true identity might disrupt the simple life his mother cherished. "I never wanted you to feel pressured or obligated because of what I've built," Thomas explained earnestly. "You've given me everything: your time, your energy, your unconditional support. This company is my way of honoring that. But I also didn't want it to overshadow the person you are. Does that make sense?" Margaret nodded slowly, processing his words. She understood his reasoning, even if it left her feeling slightly conflicted. On one hand, she admired his desire to protect her. On the other, she couldn't help but wonder how different things might have been if she had known earlier. Would she have encouraged him to dream even bigger? Would she have shared in his triumphs along the way? Before she could dwell too long on those thoughts, Richard re-entered the room carrying a tray of tea and biscuits. Setting it down on the coffee table, he smiled warmly. "I thought you two might need a break," he said, pouring steaming cups for both Margaret and Thomas. As they sipped their tea, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Thomas shared amusing anecdotes from the early days of the airline, including the time he accidentally locked himself inside a cargo hold during a routine inspection. Margaret laughed heartily, marveling at how much her quiet, bookish son had grown into a charismatic leader capable of commanding respect from thousands of employees. But amid the laughter, Margaret's sharp instincts kicked in. She leaned forward, fixing Thomas with a pointed look. "All right, enough of the funny stories," she said firmly. "What exactly happened with my flight today? Why was I treated like some ordinary passenger?" Thomas winced, clearly anticipating this question. "That's actually why I asked Richard to bring you here," he confessed. "We've been reviewing recent customer feedback, and unfortunately, your experience wasn't unique. There have been complaints about our staff mishandling reservations, especially when it comes to upgrades and seating arrangements. When I heard about what happened to you, I knew I had to act immediately." He paused, choosing his words carefully. Global Wings is supposed to represent excellence, not just in terms of service, but in how we treat people. What happened to you goes against everything we stand for. So, Mom, I'm asking for your help. I want you to see firsthand how the company operates, meet the people behind the scenes, and share your perspective. You've always had a knack for spotting problems others miss. Maybe you can help us find solutions. Margaret blinked in surprise. Me? Help run an airline? I don't know anything about airplanes or ticketing systems. You don't need to, Thomas replied quickly. All you need is your common sense and your heart. That's more valuable than any textbook knowledge. Whoa. A moment Margaret considered declining. After all, she was just a retired grandmother, not a corporate executive. But then she remembered the frustration she had felt on the plane, the dismissive attitude of the staff, and the injustice of being treated like an afterthought. If she could use her voice to prevent others from experiencing the same, wouldn't that be worth it? A determined glint appeared in her eyes. "All right," she said with a nod. "If you think I can help, then I'll do it. But only on one condition." "What's that?" Thomas asked, raising an eyebrow. "That you promise to listen to me, even if I say things you don't want to hear." Thomas grinned, relief washing over his face. "Deal." Over the next few days, Margaret threw herself into learning about the inner workings of Global Wings Airlines. Accompanied by Richard and a small team of executives, she toured the facilities, met key members of the staff, and observed daily operations. From the bustling call centers to the gleaming hangars where planes were maintained, she soaked in every detail, asking questions and offering suggestions whenever inspiration struck. Her straightforward approach won over even the most skeptical employees. During one meeting, she listened intently as managers discussed strategies for improving customer retention. When it was her turn to speak, she simply said, "Why not start by treating passengers like human beings instead of numbers? A little kindness goes a long way." Her comment sparked a lively debate, ultimately leading to the implementation of new training programs focused on empathy and communication. Similarly, when she noticed that elderly travelers often struggled with heavy luggage, she suggested adding complimentary porter services at check-in counters. Her ideas were practical, thoughtful, and rooted in real-life experiences, qualities that resonated deeply with everyone involved. Word of Margaret's involvement spread quickly throughout the company. Employees began referring to her affectionately as the First Lady of Global Wings, a title she accepted with a mix of amusement and pride. To them, she represented not just the founder's mother, but a symbol of the values the airline aimed to embody: humility, resilience, and a genuine commitment to making a difference. Meanwhile, Thomas watched proudly as his mother embraced her role with grace and humor. Together, they launched initiatives aimed at enhancing customer satisfaction and giving back to communities affected by aviation-related challenges. Their partnership became a testament to the power of love, hard work, and staying true to one's values. By the end of the week, Margaret had transformed from a reluctant participant into a force to be reckoned with. Her presence inspired positive change at every level of the organization, proving that sometimes the simplest voices carry the most weight. And though she never sought recognition, her impact was undeniable. A reminder that greatness often lies not in wealth or fame, but in the ability to uplift others. As Margaret prepared to return home, she reflected on everything that had transpired. What had begun as a frustrating encounter at the airport had blossomed into a journey of discovery, one that reaffirmed her belief in the importance of kindness, integrity, and family. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive, ready to embrace whatever adventures lay ahead. Margaret's newfound role within Global Wings Airlines brought about changes no one could have anticipated, not even Thomas. What started as a temporary visit to address customer service issues quickly evolved into something much bigger. Margaret's insights, delivered with her trademark blend of wisdom and wit, resonated deeply with employees at every level of the organization. Her suggestions weren't just practical, they were transformative, addressing problems that had long been ignored or brushed aside. But Margaret wasn't content to stop there. She knew that real change required more than just surface-level adjustments. It demanded accountability, transparency, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. And so, she decided to confront the very heart of the issue, the culture within, the airline itself. One afternoon, during a high-level executive meeting, Margaret sat quietly in the corner of the conference room, observing the presentations unfolding before her. The executives spoke confidently about quarterly profits, passenger, growth, and technological advancements. But Margaret noticed something missing, a genuine focus on the human element. When it was her turn to speak, she leaned forward, her piercing gaze sweeping across the table. "All these numbers are impressive," she began, her voice calm but firm. "But I'm not here to talk about balance sheets or stock prices. I'm here because people, real people, are being treated poorly. They're being dismissed, disrespected, and forgotten. And until we fix that, none of this matters." The room fell silent. No one dared interrupt as Margaret continued, her words cutting through years of corporate complacency. "Take my experience on the plane, for example. I wasn't just denied a seat I paid for, I was made to feel invisible, like I didn't matter. That's not an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a larger problem. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of why this company exists in the first place, to serve people." Her speech struck a chord, leaving many in the room visibly moved. Even Thomas, who had always admired his mother's strength, found himself humbled by her clarity and conviction. For years, he had focused on scaling the business, expanding routes, and increasing revenue. But now, he realized, he had overlooked the most important aspect of all, the passengers. Determined to make amends, Thomas announced a series of sweeping reforms aimed at improving customer service and fostering a culture of empathy. Under Margaret's guidance, the airline implemented new policies designed to ensure that every passenger felt valued, regardless of their ticket class or travel history. These included mandatory training programs for staff, stricter guidelines for handling complaints, and incentives for employees who went above and beyond to assist travelers. But Margaret didn't stop there. Drawing from her own experiences as an elderly traveler, she advocated for initiatives specifically tailored to senior citizens, families with young children, and individuals with disabilities. Among her proposals were priority boarding options for vulnerable groups, complimentary meal vouchers for delayed flights, and partnerships with local charities to provide support for stranded passengers. Her efforts soon caught the attention of media outlets, sparking widespread interest in her story. Reporters clamored to interview the First Lady of Global Wings, eager to learn more about the woman behind the man. At first, Margaret hesitated, uncomfortable with the idea of becoming the center of attention. But when she realized how much good publicity could do for the airline and for the causes she cared about, she agreed to step into the spotlight. During one particularly memorable television appearance, Margaret shared anecdotes from her childhood, painting a vivid picture of the sacrifices she had made to raise Thomas alone. "When you've worked 2 jobs to put food on the table, you don't take anything for granted," she told the host, her voice tinged with emotion. "You learn to appreciate the little things, the kindness of strangers, the joy of seeing your child succeed. Those lessons shaped me, and they continue to guide me today." Her authenticity struck a chord with viewers, many of whom reached out to express their admiration and gratitude. Social media platforms lit up with hashtags like "Be kind like Margaret" and "Travel with Heart," inspiring countless others to share their own stories of compassion and resilience. In a world often dominated by cynicism, Margaret's message of hope and humanity shone brightly, reminding everyone of the power of small acts of kindness. Back at Global Wing's headquarters, Margaret's influence continued to grow. Employees looked to her as a mentor, seeking her advice on everything from conflict resolution to workplace morale. Her ability to connect with people on a personal level earned her universal respect, bridging gaps between departments and fostering a sense of unity across the organization. Even Thomas found himself learning from his mother in ways he never expected. "She has this incredible gift for seeing things clearly," he once remarked during an interview. "Where I might get bogged down in details or overthink a decision, she cuts straight to the heart of the matter. It's like having a moral compass right beside you." Of course, not everyone welcomed Margaret's involvement with open arms. Some executives bristled at her unorthodox methods, viewing her as an outsider who lacked formal qualifications. Others worried that her emphasis on customer satisfaction would come at the expense of profitability, but Margaret refused to back down, using logic, humor, and sheer determination to win over even the most skeptical critics. "You can crunch numbers all day," she would say with a twinkle in her eye. "But at the end of the day, our success isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in smiles. If we're not making people happy, then what's the point?" Her philosophy proved infectious, spreading throughout the company like wildfire. Within months, Global Wing saw a dramatic improvement in customer feedback, with ratings soaring to record highs. Passengers praised the airline for its attentive staff, seamless operations, and heartfelt commitment to excellence. Competitors scrambled to keep up, but none could replicate the unique blend of warmth and professionalism that had become synonymous with Margaret's vision. Despite her growing fame, Margaret remained grounded, refusing to let success go to her head. She continued traveling regularly to visit her grandchildren, though now she did so in luxury suites designed specifically for her comfort. Whenever someone asked how she managed to navigate such a drastic change in lifestyle, she simply smiled and replied, "Sometimes life surprises you in the best ways possible." And yet, beneath her cheerful demeanor, Margaret harbored a quiet sense of fulfillment. After decades of putting others first, she finally felt seen, not just as a mother or grandmother, but as a person with ideas, dreams, and the power to make a difference. It was a revelation that filled her with purpose, driving her to push even harder for positive change. As the months passed, Margaret's presence became an integral part of Global Wing's Airlines. Her name appeared on internal memos, training, manuals, and promotional materials, symbolizing the values the company stood for. Employees referred to her as the heart of the airline, a title she accepted with characteristic humility. To them, she represented not just the founder's mother, but a beacon of hope, a reminder that greatness lies not in wealth or titles, but in the ability to uplift others. For Thomas, watching his mother thrive in this new role was both humbling and inspiring. He had always known she was extraordinary, but seeing her impact firsthand deepened his appreciation for everything she had done and continued to do for him. Together, they formed a partnership unlike any other, united by love, shared values, and a desire to leave the world better than they found it. By the time Margaret returned home after several weeks of intense work, she carried with her a renewed sense of purpose. What had begun as a frustrating encounter at the airport had blossomed into a journey of self-discovery, one that reaffirmed her belief in the importance of kindness, integrity, and family. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive, ready to embrace whatever adventures lay ahead. As she unpacked her suitcase and settled back into her routine, Margaret reflected on everything that had transpired. She thought about the people she had met, the challenges she had faced, and the victories she had celebrated. Most of all, she thought about the lessons she had learned, not just about running an airline, but about life itself. Change is possible, she whispered to herself, gazing out the window at the sunset. All it takes is courage, compassion, and a willingness to listen. Little did she know, her journey was far from over. The seeds she had planted within Global Wings Airlines and within herself were only beginning to sprout, promising a future filled with endless possibilities. Margaret's impact on Global Wings Airlines was undeniable, but her influence extended far beyond the walls of corporate offices and airport terminals. What had started as a simple trip to visit her grandchildren had blossomed into something much larger, a movement that inspired countless individuals to rethink how they interacted with others. Her story became a beacon of hope, proving that even in a world often driven by profit margins and bottom lines, kindness could still reign supreme. As news of Margaret's involvement spread, she became a household name. Media outlets dubbed her the First Lady of Global Wings, and soon invitations poured in from dignitaries, industry leaders, and community organizations, eager to meet the woman who had single-handedly transformed one of the largest airlines in the world. Yet despite the growing attention, Margaret remained steadfast in her values. She declined offers for lucrative endorsements or glamorous speaking engagements, choosing instead to focus on what truly mattered, making travel accessible, enjoyable, and respectful for everyone. Her humility only endeared her further to the public. People admired not just her achievements but also her authenticity. Whether addressing a room full of executives or chatting casually with passengers during impromptu visits to airports, Margaret exuded warmth and sincerity. She spoke plainly, without pretense or jargon, connecting with people on a deeply human level. Her message was simple yet profound. Treat others the way you would want to be treated, regardless of their background or circumstances. Thomas watched proudly as his mother embraced her newfound role with grace and humor. Together, they launched initiatives aimed at enhancing customer satisfaction, while giving back to communities affected by aviation-related challenges. For example, they partnered with local schools near major airports to create scholarship programs for children whose education had been disrupted by noise pollution. They also collaborated with environmental groups to develop sustainable practices, reducing the airline's carbon footprint and promoting eco-friendly travel options. But perhaps Margaret's most significant contribution was her advocacy for elderly travelers. Having experienced firsthand the frustrations of navigating air travel as a senior citizen, she championed policies that prioritized accessibility and comfort for older passengers. These included designated seating areas at gates, free mobility aids like wheelchairs and walkers, and training sessions for staff on how to assist elderly customers with patience and respect. Her efforts earned her widespread acclaim, including prestigious awards for leadership and humanitarianism. At one ceremony where she received the Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in Customer Service, Margaret delivered a speech that brought tears to the eyes of many attendees. Standing on stage, clutching the award in her hands, she reflected on the journey that had led her here. "I never set out to change the world," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I simply wanted to see my grandchildren, to spend time with the people I love. But sometimes life has other plans. Sometimes it pushes us out of our comfort zones and asks us to do more than we ever thought possible." She paused, scanning the audience before continuing. "When I was denied that first-class seat, I felt invisible, like my needs didn't matter. And maybe, in that moment, I wasn't wrong. But what I learned along the way is that invisibility isn't permanent. It can be overcome, with courage, determination, and a little help from those around you." Her words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Journalists scrambled to capture every detail of her speech while social media erupted with praise for her wisdom and resilience. Hashtags like Invisible No More and Margaret's Message trended globally, sparking conversations about empathy, inclusion, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity. Despite the accolades, Margaret refused to rest on her laurels. She knew There was still work to be done, both within the airline industry and beyond. Inspired by her success, she began exploring ways to expand her reach, partnering with advocacy groups focused on issues ranging from healthcare access to affordable housing. Her philosophy remained consistent: start small, think big, and always put people first. One of her proudest accomplishments came when Global Wings unveiled a groundbreaking initiative called Wings of Kindness. The program provided free flights to families separated by distance, medical emergencies, or natural disasters. Each flight was accompanied by personalized care packages containing essentials like blankets, toiletries, and handwritten notes of encouragement from employees. Within its first year, the program reunited thousands of loved ones, earning widespread recognition and gratitude. Margaret's presence at the heart of these efforts ensured that compassion remained the guiding principle behind every decision. Employees often joked that working under her watchful eye was both inspiring and intimidating. Inspiring because she believed so fiercely in their potential, and intimidating because she expected nothing less than excellence. Yet, rather than resenting her high standards, they embraced them, knowing that her expectations stemmed from genuine care and concern. For Thomas, watching his mother thrive in this new chapter of her life was nothing short of miraculous. He marveled at how seamlessly she balanced authority and humility, leadership and empathy. "She's taught me more about running a business than any textbook ever could," he once confided to a colleague. "And not just a business, a legacy, something that will endure long after we're gone." Yet amidst all the accolades and achievements, Margaret never lost sight of what truly mattered: family. Despite her busy schedule, she made time for regular visits with her grandchildren, baking cookies together, reading bedtime stories, and sharing tales of her adventures. To them, she was simply Grandma, a source of unconditional love and endless wisdom. They adored hearing about her travels, especially the funny moments, like the time she accidentally mistook a pilot for a flight attendant and asked him to fetch her a cup of tea. "It's important to laugh at yourself," she would tell them, with a wink. Life's too short to take everything seriously. As the years passed, Margaret's legacy continued to grow. Schools named scholarships after her, charities adopted her philosophies, and aspiring entrepreneurs cited her as a role model. Even competitors couldn't deny the positive ripple effect she had created across the industry, prompting them to adopt similar practices aimed at improving customer service and fostering inclusivity. But for Margaret, the greatest reward wasn't fame or fortune, it was the knowledge that she had made a difference. That somewhere, someone might board a plane feeling valued, respected, and cared for because of the changes she had helped implement. That a child might sleep soundly tonight thanks to a donated flight that brought their parent home safely. That an elderly traveler might navigate an airport without fear or frustration, knowing that someone had thought of their needs. On her 80th birthday, surrounded by family, friends, and colleagues, Margaret reflected on the twists and turns her life had taken. From raising Thomas alone to transforming an entire industry, hers was a story of resilience, sacrifice, and unwavering faith in the goodness of humanity. As balloons floated toward the ceiling and laughter filled the room, she raised a glass to toast, not to herself but to the countless individuals who had supported her along the way. "To all of you," she said, her eyes shining with gratitude, "for reminding me that no matter how old we get, there's always room to learn, to grow, and to make the world a better place." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the halls like a promise that Margaret's spirit of kindness would live on, touching lives for generations to come. And though she may have started as an ordinary woman with extraordinary dreams, she ended as a legend whose name would forever be synonymous with compassion, integrity, and the power of believing in oneself. For Margaret Thompson, the sky was no longer the limit. It was just the beginning.